Everyone. Thank you for your interest in Canada and the Arazzi Group. Arazzi Group is a global regulatory affairs consulting company. We help hundreds of clients with thousands of submissions all over the world. Um, we focus not only on getting products to market with the lowest burden financially and time-wise to clients, but also to maintain the licensing, especially in countries where it requires annual renewal and post-marketing activities. If there's no questions, I'll get started. Thank you for your interest in Canada. Canada is a market that pretty much stands alone. They don't have conformity assessment routes like Australia does to make the burden lower. They have their own requirements. It doesn't really matter if you have CE mark or you're approved in the US or another country. They have their own unique regulatory process. Recently, I'd say within the last year, Health Canada has been making a very strong effort to harmonize with the US FDA. FDA has just changed significantly the way submissions are done in the US. They've moved to a format called eStar. And I'll get into that in more detail at the end of the presentation. So Health Canada is, trying to harmonize very much with the U.S. Ultimately to something called a dual submission, where you can prepare an eStar and it can be submitted to both the FDA and Health Canada at the same time. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so we'll start at the beginning, and that would be the first slide. Health Canada has their own regulations, SOR 98282. Some people call them CMDR, or the Canadian Medical Device Regulations. They apply to the importation, sale, and advertising of a medical device. They also apply to in vitro diagnostic devices, IVDDs, which can contain drugs, as part of the assay uh, for determining the levels that it's looking for in the assay. Medical devices are classified into four classifications. There are classification rules set out in 98282. There's a schedule that you can use to go through. Class 1 is the lowest risk. Class 4 is the highest risk. Haven't been too many changes to the rules since the introduction of the medical device regulations, except for software as medical device. There are additional rules that have come out for software as medical device because that's a newer type of designation. And also, um, so the applications may be in English. Health Canada does not require applications to be in French. The only document that Health Canada requires to be in the French language are implant cards. So for medical implants and for direct to consumer products. So if you're marketing a device directly to the consumers, then they want that to be in English and French. But as far as most devices, Canada doesn't have the prescription versus over-the-counter rules like the U.S. But they do assume that most of the healthcare providers are fluent English, and so that the English labeling and English applications are adequate. So the first step in getting a license in Canada is to find out if the product meets the definition of a medical device. Every regulator has this definition. You've dealt with notified bodies for CE, maybe with the FDA. So there is a definition of what is a medical device and what's a non-medical device, IVD, or a software product. This next step would be to determine the classification, class 1 through 4, and then to determine the quality certificate requirements. Whereas, unlike the FDA, Health Canada requires a quality system assessment as part of their marketing application for a license. The fourth step is you submit the license to Health Canada, and pay the license review fees, which happens after typically the screening process. Health Canada, they want to be paid for the review, like most regulators want to be paid. And then the final step is you begin the importation or the sales and start to do the post-marketing requirements that are applicable in Canada, probably similar to what you're doing with CE. Here's the actual classification requirements. So for class one, the lowest class, there's no quality system certificate requirement. There's actually no medical device license requirement. Instead, the Health Canada requires an establishment license for the establishment that's manufacturing the product, and you can be outside of Canada uh, for your medical device IVD or software. Also, for the distributors that you use, if you're using distributors in Canada, they need to have an establishment license also. It's called an MDEL. Um, if you have a medical device license already for a class two, three, or four, you do not need an establishment license to sell class one. So it's the only time that a manufacturer needs an establishment license to sell a class one device is if they don't have any existing medical device license devices, class two through four. Now, class two through four, you do need to have an MDSAP certificate. It is required, it's a prerequisite to submit the application to get a medical device license, which they call an MDL. And this would be for a medical device, for an IVD, for software as a medical device, or for private label licensing. So the review fees are not too bad. The MDEL application for a class one, if you don't if you're a manufacturer and don't have any other Canada licensing, is 5,000 Canadian dollars. These are all Canadian dollars. Um, Class two is very low. It's 589 or 300 for an amendment, and so on and so forth. You see the class four and class three are a bit more. These are the regular fees. These are not small business fees. We'll get into it. There is a small business reduction available in Canada for small businesses, which reduce these fees. But these are the fees without any small business type reduction. Um, and private label is the least expensive. It's 163 for all of these license applications, except for the class one and the private label. You need an MDSAP certificate. Um, Class one doesn't need an MDSAP certificate because it's not a license for the device; it's a license for the establishment. And private label applications, they are leveraging the MDSAP certificate of the medical device license that they're private labeling off of. And that's why they don't need their own MDSAP. So if you have a partner in Canada and they have a medical device license, you can private label off of their license relatively quickly in a couple of weeks for a small fee. And you can also do that temporarily while you're doing your own medical device license if you want. Or if your device is very unique and there's no competitor devices licensed in Canada on the market, you can do special access where the healthcare provider will actually request special access for your device to be able to use it, even though it's not licensed. And if Health Canada agrees there's no other equivalent medical device on the market license, they'll typically approve it. And then you're allowed to sell your devices to that healthcare provider. Review timelines, again, just like with any agency, these are theoretical. Every time there's a question or, is some additional information required, these timelines get reset. So, each submission has a 4-day acceptance for administrative, and then a 15 days for what I call the regulatory screening. Except for amendments, those are only 7 days. So usually after you submit your license application after 2 weeks, you should get some type of an acceptance letter or some questions from the agency.
Right.
Most of the questions in this situation have to do with the company name or address on your MDSAP certificate is not identical to the ones on your labeling or in the application, or model names are not different. One of the things Health Canada really focuses on is consistency with model numbers, names, company name, and address. Everything has to be perfect, copy paste. So that's where, if there's a regulatory screening issue, it usually occurs because there was an inconsistency somewhere. Then later, if there's a question, they reset the clock. So they're always doing a 15-day review. And that's why I have here additional screening reviews are 15 days. So then once the screening period's over, you have 30 days or 60 days for a class 3 substantive review, 75 days for a class 4. There's no additional days for a class 2 or a private label. If there's no screening questions after 2 weeks, your license is issued. For the class 3 and class 4, the difference is that you're submitting dossiers, technical dossiers for those two, where the other applications, you're not really submitting a dossier. It's just a few documents, some labels, your MDSAP certificate, the application form. So if the reviewers have questions about the evidence you've provided, scientific, clinical, bench testing, then they'll ask questions during that 60 or 75 days. If they have questions, again, each review cycle where they have questions, you add an additional 45 days. So if you go through one round of questions, during screening, you add 15 days. If you go through one round of questions during the substantive review, you add 45 days. But other than that, the goal for Health Canada is to, meet the 60 or 75 days um, in the review. I see class 1 MDEL, the guidance says 120 days. I've never seen that. Usually within a few weeks, an MDEL certificate is issued. I don't know why they say 120 days. I think they just want to have that option in case they need it, but usually it does not take that long. So the classification rules are based really on the risk they pose to the patient. So invasive devices used in the central systems like cardiovascular nervous system are going to be a higher risk. Duration of body contact influences the risk rules. Permanent versus prolonged contact duration is moderate risk. Non-invasive devices like handheld instruments or devices which contact unbroken skin have a lower risk typically. Externally communicating devices which inject into the blood or circulate blood are a higher risk. Often the durable type equipment will often have a lower risk. So for class 1, so some examples, and I won't waste the whole 45 minutes going through each of these, but I did want to present these in slides for after the meeting, so that you have a copy of this to see, if where does your medical device possibly fit in, without studying, going through all the rules. Here you might, be able to find where your device would fit in class 1 through class 4 to understand the regulatory burden you might be looking at going to Canada. So, simple devices, toothbrush, nasal splints, clamps, forceps, bandages, mechanical barriers, wheelchairs, leg braces, dental lights, those are all class 1 low risk. So they're, like I was saying, you need an establishment license for a class 1, and distributors that you use in Canada, if you use them, they'll need one as well. They all know that. Experienced distributors already know that they require an MDEL, so they probably have it. Unless it's a new distributor or somebody that who wants to be a distributor, but hasn't yet, they may not know. But most of the big guys know, and they have these already. If you have a license for a class 2 or 3, 4 device, you don't need an MDEL. You can sell your class 1 devices as is. It's only required for manufacturers that don't have an MDL, a medical device license for a class 2, 3, or 4. MDSAP requirements, I put this in here because it wasn't required for class 1. It is for class 2 through 4. Um, so you need to have an MDSAP certificate. It has to be part of the application. The company name and address on the certificate needs to be identical, verbatim, to the labels, the application form, and the references throughout the submission. The application date has to be in between the issue and the expiration date on your MDSAP certificate. And the MDSAP certificate must be, it may not exceed 3 years. I've had Health Canada reject an MDSAP certificate because it was 3 years in one day. So they look pretty closely at that. Um, and it's not just any old MDSAP certificate. You want to make sure, because some notified bodies are more experienced with Canada regulations than others. You want to make sure that it has, the quality system requirements of 1345 2016 and the medical device regulations part 1 of SOR 98282. So this is really the main thing you want to have is it's got to say Canada Medical Device Regulations Part 1 SOR 98282 on the MDSAP certificate for it to be valid for Canada. For class 2 examples, they're often, short-term invasive devices like surgical needles, intravascular catheters, scopes, the daily replacement contact lenses, tubes, denture materials, orthodontic type materials and brackets, uh, devices to that contact injured skin to promote healing or to be a environmental barrier against external contaminations to the wound. For channeling, storing gases, liquid tissues like ventilator tubes, feeding bags, um, things like that. And a lot of times, class 1 low risk devices like drill bits and uh, uh, driver heads, like a screwdriver head or something, if they are connected to an active device, they become class 2. So if you have manual drills or manual tapers and things that you manually turn with a hand instrument, those would be class 1. But as soon as you take that bit and put it into a drill or any kind of power driver, it becomes class 2 and it requires MDSAP and a medical device license.
Ray, could you please? Okay. Now it's fixed.
Oh, okay. I changed the screen. Hopefully that refreshed it. So, therapeutic devices, software, it takes on the same classification as the parent that it's used with. So, software would be on the license. There are some additional classification rules for software when it's not in the medical device, but it's associated with it. And Disinfectors for medical devices are class 2. Class 2 license requirements are not too difficult. There's an application form, a fee form, the MDSAP certificate, and your labeling for the product. That's really all that gets submitted. Typically, these are less than 20 megabytes, so they can be emailed. So they're instantaneously at Health Canada. And this is outside of the fact that Health Canada is in a pilot, which they've decided to make permanent, where they're going to accept and eventually require electronic submissions through the FDA e-submitter software. But right now, up to this point where it has not been required, unless you were one of the 20 companies that voluntarily joined the pilot, you were always able to email any submission to Health Canada if it was under 20 megabytes. Um, and like I said here, if you were one of the 40 companies that participated in the pilot, then you could submit electronically any size. And again, I'll get into that a little bit, but the REP pilot is a pilot during 2023 that Health Canada did with FDA to experience FDA submissions being converted into Canada submissions and sent to Health Canada through the FDA portal. There's a software that FDA has. It's called eSubmitter. I use it to do my submissions to FDA. And so Health Canada wants to basically get on board with that. They've made a decision just recently. January 2024, it'll be open for everybody, out even people outside the pilot. And then by 18 months later, so June 2025, it will be mandatory. So there's been some really big changes in the US in the past few months, and there's some really big changes coming in Canada in the next 22 months or so. Class 3, a little more involved now. This is where you have a dossier, which goes along with your application. This is for really probably most of the medical devices would fall in class 3. So it'd be your implants, like dental implants, abutments. Abutments aren't really implanted, but they're still considered class 3 by Health Canada because they're permanently implanted into an oral orifice, the mouth, even though they're not, implanted into bone or soft tissue. So all your other orthopedic implants, resins, or permanent dental cements, anything that's contains contact with the surface of the eye for 30 days. So it'd be extended wear contact lenses versus daily replacement. Anything like IUDs that prevent disease during sexual activity, anything that's intended to modify compositions of the blood or other bodily fluids like dialysis systems, purification, reverse osmosis. More would be your active equipment, isotope seeds, densitometers, any CT or MRI type scanners. Um, uh, Devices like lasers, defibrillators, high energy ultrasound that are delivering energy to the body, which could be in dangerous intensity, and things that monitor or diagnose, diseases. So like cardiac monitor, arrhythmia detector, neonatal heart rate monitor, things like that, where a false reading could be put the patient at risk. And administration of potentially hazardous substances like dialysis, insulin, anesthesia, where if the dose is incorrect, the patient could be at risk. Mammography, of course, where misdiagnosis could be detrimental to the patient. The license requirements, you have the same ones, class 2, so your application fee, your form, MDSAP labeling. If it's an implant, there's an implant card that's required. And then, of course, there's a lot of detailed information about describing the device, the packaging, the history of the design. There's global sales versus risks, like a risk benefit assessment per country where the device has been sold. This is one place where Health Canada does leverage a little bit a safe sales history, a performance history of the device outside of Canada as one of the things they consider. There's with Canada, it's interesting because not every single test report and document, like with FDA, is required. They're going to make a decision based on all of the documents provided. So, if you didn't do this test or you didn't do that test or you don't have a clinical study, it doesn't mean that the device won't be approved. It just means that your argument or justification for the device to be approved is a little weaker. So if a client has all this product testing and the results look good, we like to include them in the submission to make a stronger justification, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the submission has to be on hold. The client runs off and does some studies of testing and then comes back. There's no black or white rule on what product testing and validation is enough and what's lacking. It's an overall look that they take, which is a little unique to Canada, but it gives us some latitude. And then now where Health Canada is trying to be more similar to the FDA, they're looking for a comparison to a licensed device to justify the classification. So in the past, you used to just pick which classification rule applies to my product the best, and that was it. But now Health Canada is wants to know what products are licensed in the Health Canada database in that classification that are very similar to your product to support the fact that you picked the best rule. I think that manufacturers were looking at the rules and trying to go with the weakest one. And years ago, Health Canada accepted that, and then Health Canada started challenging the rules, but it was pretty easy to defend why you chose that rule. So they decided to adopt the substantial equivalence discussion that FDA has been using, and so now, when in your cover letter, when you say that our device is class 3 based on rule 8B, you will have to also give an example of a equivalent product that is licensed as that same classification. So that's been a change recently. And again, the 20 megabyte is the rule for emails. So usually class 3 and 4 are too big to be emailed, but responses, additional information requests, often can be submitted by email. If it can't be submitted by email, we throw them on a thumb drive and FedEx them overnight. So it's there the next day anyways. So it's just a difference of one day and the cost of the FedEx envelope. And then there's non-clinical product testing. So depending on the design, electrical safety, EMC, pyrogen, biocompatibility, shelf life, sterilization, and then sometimes clinical evaluation if you have it. A lot of our clients have CE marks, so they already have a clinical evaluation report based on literature. Maybe they haven't done an actual study, but usually this is enough, a clinical evaluation report for most class 3 devices. And class 4 is a little more difficult. Class 4, they're looking for a little more information. We include in a class 4 some of the quality management system documentation for the device specific. So the quality plans, some of the quality procedures for controlling incoming materials and fabrication, QC analysis. And there might be more clinical requirements, so actual clinical study, but typically, we've been doing a lot of class 4 devices lately, actually, but most devices fall into class 3. Usually, if it's got animal derived material, or if it's heart valves, we've done recently, which are class 4. We've done some dental implants that were made out of biological materials that were class 4. And if it's a DNA type to HA, hyaluronic acid, or human tissues are class 4. Breast implants and augmentation devices are class 4. The license requirements are similar to class 3. You do have some quality assurance document like a plan, your SOPs for controls, and risk management documents. So there is more risk management, ISO 14971 type documents that are required, but the dossier looks similar to the class 3 dossier. Software as medical device has their own rules and guidance document, which came out later. There's some inclusion exclusion criteria you apply to the software to see if it's even a medical device. It might not be. If it is a medical device, there's a guidance document which discusses the classification rules for the software. And there's a section, if it's software that's used for an IVD, there's also special classification rules. They don't conflict or contradict the rules that are in the medical device regulations, they complement them to help them be more applicable to a software only device. So in some, just some quick examples, software may not be considered a medical device at all if it's intended only for administrative support, clinical communication workflow, registration, general wellness type products, personal history tracking, but it may not acquire, process, or analyze images, signals, or print the information to be exempt. And software should not replace clinical judgment of the healthcare provider, as within any market, really. Um, if it's used to inform clinical management and non-serious situations, it could be classified as class one. If it supplies energy for the purpose of imaging or monitoring physiological processes, could be class two. And if it's used to monitor or diagnose diseases or, uh, any, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word I'm looking for right now. Apologize. But if erroneous readings could result in immediate danger, not necessarily danger down the line, but something immediately like real-time heart rate monitoring or arrhythmia detection, then it would be class three. And this is just a nice chart to look at, so you can see, if it's critical, it's class three. If it's serious, it could be two or three. If it's non-serious, this is really the risk to the patient, then it could be class one or class two. When it's used with an IVD, it takes on the same rules as IVD classification. Those are set out in the guidance. And there are some separate rules for software as medical device under IVDD which do not apply. Rule 6 indicates that any near patient IVDs are class 3, but software as medical device is not intended to be used outside a laboratory environment, so rule 6 is not applicable if your IVD is a software as medical device. So that's a loophole there. And then just quickly, because I know our time is being used up, IVDs, very similar to medical devices. It's class one if there's a minimal risk to the public or the patients. So it kind of comes down to what are you looking for in the assay? Are you looking for positivity of HIV plus? That's a high risk. Or are you looking for a urinary tract infection, which is a lower risk? So it kind of depends what the assay is looking for and what that misdiagnosis impact would be on that patient or on a larger pandemic if you're looking for something contagious. Class two would be more moderate risks, and class three would be higher risks. And then class four would be, a high public risk to the community. So for example, hepatitis, West Nile virus, HIV, and then of course near patient class four. License requirements are pretty much the same, use the same forms, very similar dossiers. Some of the, the testing and the performance of an IVD is different. It's more about accuracy, analytical sensitivity, specificity. So if you're experienced with IVDs, then you know what type of data they're looking for in the dossier versus a normal medical device. Um, and if your medical device includes the instruments, whether that be a hardware instrument or a safety instrument, then you have the regular medical device stuff, EMC safety, software validation, cleaning, disinfection, usability, etc. But the bench testing is where there's a difference between medical devices and IVDs when it comes to what you're actually testing, and that's not just for Canada, but that's for the U.S. and probably for Europe, I would think as well. and then your clinical is similar, the requirements. So Canada license, no matter what type of license you get, it never expires. They're permanent, like an FDA 510K. But they do every year. There's a renewal process where Health Canada wants you to confirm if you're going to continue selling that device in the upcoming year, or if you want to pull it from the market. So, if you want to continue selling a licensed product for the upcoming year, then you just check some boxes, sign some documents, and then you'll get invoiced for it's $394, I think, per license, and that's good for the year. And then each year you'll go through that. The emails are sent out automatically at the first week of August, and the deadline to get them filed back is November 1st. And then in January, you'll be invoiced for that upcoming year for the licenses which you decide you want to continue selling on. Um, and if you make any changes during the year, your address, company name, or your MDSAP certificate, you need to send it with a form to Health Canada just to let them know so that they stay up to date on that information. There is a small business discount. You can apply for a small business discount if you're under 5 million Canadian dollars and have less than 100 employees. It takes 48. You'll get the discount immediately, but you should wait 48 hours before you submit any applications using that discount. They're only good for 12 months. So if you're going to submit more license applications in the following year, you need a new number. And if you're not going to, you don't, because this is not applicable for the annual renewals. It's only for your first license. Typical savings can be between 50 and 25%. Very rare that somebody will be a publicly funded institution or government. It would have to be in Canada. So you'd have, for these last two, you'd have to be in Canada, part of the Canadian government or funded by the Canadian government. And the upcoming changes I talked about, there's the pilot program they did with FDA during 2023. REP stands for Regulatory Enrollment Process. And Health Canada was happy with the results. So they decided, only 40 companies participated in that pilot. They decided that starting January 2024, and Health Canada uses a calendar year, not a fiscal year. So it would be January is the first day of 2024 for Health Canada. You can voluntarily prepare your submissions in IMDRF format. It's mandatory. We use IMDRF format right now at Arazzi Group. We've been doing it, so there's not an issue there. And then in June of 2025, 18 months later, it will be mandatory. The FDA has a portal. It's called ESG, Electronic Submission. I forget what the G stands for. And they add the C in front of it for Canadian ESG. But if you already do FDA submissions with an ESG portal, you don't really have to create anything additional. But you do have to do some stuff on the Canadian side. There's some additional documents you have to fill out that will go along with the submission. That was for the pilot. I'm not sure if they will continue those additional documents for the voluntary and then the mandatory program. But yeah, big changes in Canada coming up in June 2025. And the FDA eStar format. If you've done any eStar submissions with FDA recently, you'll notice there is a Health Canada button on the form. So the eStar format has been developed to do Canadian submissions. It's just grayed out, so you can't click it just yet. So when we look at everything we just went through in this presentation, how to prepare a Canadian submission, I think that will be changing pretty soon. And you'll have this dual submission where you just fill out the eStar format, like for FDA. And then by clicking the Canada button, you might have some additional fields to complete, but for the most part, it'll convert it into a Canadian format. And you can then also submit it with the ESG portal to Health Canada. So Canada and the US are really harmonizing more than I ever thought would be possible. And some new guidance documents coming out in 2023 to 2025 in Canada. They want to improve access for underrepresented populations. They want to create an emergency pathway, kind of like FDA has emergency use, compassionate use if you have an IDE. They want to create that for medical devices. And they want to do some amendments to the radiation emitting devices regulation. Maybe they want to start tracking, like FDA does, annual reporting if you have lasers or emitters. I'm not sure. So we'll wait and see what those look like when they come out. And thank you very much for participating in the presentation. And there's still some product codes where FDA has not cleaned them up yet.